If you've got a Bible, Luke chapter 16. So we are in our summer series of looking at parables. We've been looking at a different parable each week, taking a break from our 1 Corinthians series, pausing through the summer, looking at some parables, and then coming back to 1 Corinthians in the new term. So let's just get straight into this. Luke chapter 16. Jesus, he said to his disciples, so there's a rich man. He had a manager, and charges were brought against this man for wasting his possessions. And so this rich man called to him and said, "What's this I hear about you? Turn in account of your management, for you can no longer be a manager. You're fired." And the manager said to himself, "Oh, great. What am I going to do now, since my master has taken this job away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do. So when I'm removed from management and people come to me, they will receive me into their houses." So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first one, "How much do you owe my master?" He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, "Okay, take your bill, sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, "How much do you owe my master?" He said, 100 measures of wheat. "Okay, take your bill, write 80. The master, when he heard of this, commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you this, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, you may receive into eternal dwellings. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. One who is dishonest in very little is dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful with unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you with true riches?" There we go. Okay. So, we were having a conversation a little while ago, many years ago, glass of wine, sat around a table. If you had to go on a desert island and you could take 5 people with you, which 5 people would you take? Okay, Team Desert Island. What would you take with you? Well, we were talking about this, and I say, well, okay, I'd take Joe. And you go, well, obviously you're taking your wife. Yes, but not for that reason. Actually, Joe's really innovative and creative. She's the kind of person that you give, a bunch of palm leaves and a piece of string, suddenly a water filter. She's that kind of person. I take my friend Bukai, who is a missionary in Africa who could cook anything, even roadkill. That's another story. I take James or Peter. They're really good at building things. And as we talked about this, it suddenly hit me. I wouldn't take me. Now, I know that I'm going on the island because I'm the one who gets to do the picking, but seriously, I just don't have the skill set. And honestly, if we ran out of food, I'm the first one who gets eaten, okay? That was my reality. And when we look at the parables, what we see is Jesus unfolding the kind of skill sets, the kind of people with the skills they have, who he wants to have on his team. Let me show you what I mean. For example, if you look at, go on for me, the Good Samaritan, okay? He comes with a whole skill set of kindness and compassion. He's proactive, he's resourceful. If we click on, we find, the wise builder on his team. He listens to Jesus, he takes on board his teaching, he builds into these things. Who else might Jesus want on his team? The watchful bridesmaid, she's attentive for Jesus' return. She's prepared, she's prioritizing. And then you get the shrewd manager, whose sneakiness is high, honesty is dubious, management skills are questionable, and his self-interest is really high. What's going on here? Why is this parable even here? And commentators have wrestled with this for 2,000 years, trying to figure out what it is that Jesus is saying. And it's baffled many Christians and many preachers. In fact, Matt was saying to me this morning, well, you chose this. You just made trouble for yourself, haven't you? I've got no sympathy for you. So what I want us to do this morning, if you've come across this parable before and you've looked at it and scratched your head and went, let's just find something else. Good Samaritan, I can handle that one. What I want us to do this morning is not drill down into everything that's an enigma about this, but to land it in such a way that we have enough to be going on. We have enough to stand on and say, I get the broad picture of what Jesus is saying. We have enough to allow God to speak to us and challenge us through this parable, and that we don't just skip over it. And also that we have enough to inform our prayers, that we say, God, the things that you are wanting to instill in me as I am in your team, can you please begin that Spirit work in me to cultivate the skill sets that you want to? If we come away with some of that this morning, then we'll have done okay. Okay, so when we tackle any parable, there are some rules we need to bring to bear as we do so. So, for example, here's one rule. When I was teaching, very often at the beginning of the year, a child would come to me with their shatterproof ruler, nice new bendy thing. Some people are already smiling because they know what happens, and it's in two pieces, and they go, my ruler broke. And you go, oh, that's a shame. And they say, but it says it's shatterproof. And you go, yes, and when you bent it until it broke, did it shatter? No. Does it say break-proof? I broke my ruler. And you go, yes, and what we can do with these parables is we can bend them beyond the point where they're supposed to be handled. They're robust and they're bendy, and Jesus' teaching is brilliant and genius, but they're not designed to be bent completely to the point where they will break. For example, where Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. We go, okay, so shepherds look after their sheep, and a good shepherd looks after their sheep really well. Jesus looks after us really well. That makes sense. But then if we bend a bit further, we go, in that culture, shepherds were poor, under-resourced, uneducated, had little else resources, and that's why they were doing what they were doing. So Jesus is also poor, uneducated, has little resources, and is, oh, hang on, it's falling apart here. Yes, because it's not supposed to bend that way. You just take the broad picture. You know, Jesus says, sin is like yeast, and it spreads throughout the whole dough if you let it. And you go, okay. And then in another place, he says the kingdom of heaven is like yeast working its way quietly throughout the whole dough. And we drill into this and go, okay, therefore the kingdom of heaven is like sin. No, that's not, you're bending it too far. And the children that come up with the rule are bending it this way. It says shatterproof, let's see what happens. They're missing the point. It's a ruler. You're supposed to draw lines with it. You're so busy bending it, you're not actually using it what it's for, which is to draw lines. And now you've broken it, and now you can't do anything with it. Jesus accused the Pharisees of making the same mistake. He said, you're so worrying about the minutiae of the law, you're missing the big picture. You strain a gnat, but you're swallowing a camel. So rule one, let's not overbend this. And this is particularly relevant for this parable. Because if we do that, we're going to miss the things that it's trying to tell us. There are many twists and turns to this. But mainly we've got to be asking, what's the broad thing that Jesus is trying to teach here? It also helps, number two, it also helps to know who's who. You know, in the Good Shepherd, the shepherd is Jesus. Okay, we can get that. What about parables that have a king or a ruler or a lord? Well, surely that always represents God. Well, in the banquet parable, the king is God. In the parable of the unforgiving servant, the king is God. But in the illustration of the king who's counting his army to decide whether he can afford to go to war, counting the cost, that's not God. The king is us. So we can't automatically assume that the person in charge is always God. The parable of the sower, well, that could be Jesus spreading the message of God, or it could be any evangelist spreading the message of God. The parable, as it stands, works either way. And what you'll find is when we come to this parable, trying to figure out, is the rich man God? If we hold that loosely, this parable will be a little bit more accessible to us. The other thing we need to bear in mind when we bring parables to look at is what's the context? What's happened? In the parable of the Good Samaritan, a man says, so who is my neighbor? Referring to the Old Testament law. And Jesus reacts to that and responds, okay, so there's a man on his way to Jericho. It's a response to what? So what are we talking about? It's not about a man on the road to Jericho. It doesn't matter that he's a man. It doesn't matter that he's from Samaria. Really, this is a conversation about Old Testament law. So what's the context of this parable, and how does that inform what we're being taught here? Okay, So, armed with these rules, let's begin to tackle this crazy story. In its simplest form, this is the broad brushstroke of this parable. Jesus is teaching his followers, and he's saying to them, you see how this manager applies all manners of energies into self-preservation? He uses every means available to him to secure his future. I want my followers to apply that level of energy and resourcefulness to the kingdom, to God's interest, to use resources they have to hand for his kingdom. The manager invests hard in his future. I want you to invest hard in your future. Same energy, different agenda. Now, if we just take that as it is and don't go any further, that is enormously challenging. For me, that takes me to places that, if I'm honest, I don't really want to go. It takes me to places where God speaks into every area of my life and says, are you squeezing everything out of that you can do? Is everything that you own everything that I own? Or are you treating it as yours in a casual, relaxed, I'm just enjoying my life kind of way? Or are you saying, what I have available to me, what I'm using, how can I use this for the kingdom of God? That's a deeply provoking, deeply challenging area for me to bring before God in prayer. I had a friend who a while ago used to catch the train to London each day, and he began asking God, what can I do with this? And so one day, he just walked the length of the train, giving out little gospel booklets saying, hi, I see you every day. I just wanted to give you this. You might find it. Now, you don't know what came from that. You don't know what work God used in that. But in that moment, he said, this could just be dead time to me, or I could be using this for the kingdom. That's kind of what this is talking about. And we begin to pray, God, where are the places that I could be doing more with the resources that I have? God, as a church community, where are the places we could be doing more with the resources that we have? We've got that prayer week coming up. If you want something to pray during that week, be praying that. So let's dig deeper. We could leave it there, but that does leave a lot of unanswered questions. Let's see if we can tackle some of the extra bits. Start with who? The rich man. Is he God, or is something else going on? Remember I said we need to hold that loosely. Here's why. Now, some people will say, yes, it's God. Just as the rich man calls the manager to account, so God calls us to account and says, the resources that I have given you, that you are stewards over, they're not yours. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, they're mine. How are you managing those resources? That's a parallel. Okay, so far so good. But then when we go a little bit further and we see him commending the manager for his dishonesty, we go, hang on, this doesn't quite seem to fit with God. Now, you can make it fit with God, and some commentators do. I think, personally, I probably lean into the other understanding, which is the manager, the rich man, is not God. He also is a self-serving, money-obsessed, fixated man. He's a hedge fund billionaire on his mega yacht with his phone saying, what are you doing with my money? And when Jesus says the sons of this world behave in a shrewd and devious way, he's including the rich. He's talking about them. They're a package deal. And he's saying, you see how those guys operate? I want you to think about you operating in that way as well. It's just a reference point. Okay? And as people listen to that, they go, I know a guy like that. There's a guy up my street who works like that. He's always got an angle. His name's probably Gary. And he operates in that kind of way. Which brings us then to context. What's the context? Well, Luke 16 follows on from Luke 15. In Luke 15, the Pharisees are grumbling that Jesus is spending time with sinners and tax collectors and everyone else. And he starts to tell some parables to explain why he's doing that. The parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the prodigal son. He's unfolding God's heart for those people. And then in chapter 16, it's almost like a swivel where he turns to his followers and says, now you've heard that, you've heard the immense, amazing news of God's heart for those people, and the Pharisees are challenged in their attitude. Now to you, I want to say, this is how you can be involved in God's heart for the world. Okay? This is how I want you to apply these skills. It's as if Jesus is saying, you've just heard that. Use your earthly resources to participate in this kingdom economy of grace. So there's this rich man, and he comes to his manager. That's the context. Now, that's great. That's good. We can get all of that. But why does the manager have to be sneaky? Why does he have to be dishonest? And why does Jesus commend that? What's going on with there? Couldn't he just be really hardworking and then that just ties everything nice and neatly in a bow? Let's see if we can pull at that thread now. Let's be clear what it's not saying. It's not saying that as followers of Jesus, we must use whatever means necessary for the purposes of the kingdom. That's not what it's saying. We're called to have a high level of integrity, of honesty, and of trustworthiness. Okay? That's not what we're being called to operate in. Now, a friend of mine was at the vet, who's a missionary, and it was a huge vet bill, and the vet said to him, if I backdate your vet insurance, you could just pay the premium on that and you wouldn't have to pay this bill. You think all of that money that's going onto this could be used in missionary kingdom resources? No, we don't succumb to that. A couple of years back, I was draining the baptistry in our last church of a morning baptisms before the evening service. And this young guy who'd been on the periphery of our church, he rocks up to the evening service and he saw me doing this and he said, "Steve, can I give you a hand? I've got a water pump in the back of my van." I thought, why not? This could be a little bit of relationship building. And so we're draining the water out, and there's me and him and the vicar. And as we're doing this, he turns to us and he says, I could get you one of these pumps. That'd make life easier for you, wouldn't it? I went, yeah, it would. Really? How would you do that? He said, well, next time I've got a customer, I'll just charge them for 2 pumps, and then you can have one. How about it? To which we went, thank you, but no. It's for the church. He said, no. That's not what this is about. That's not the realm that we're called to operate in. Okay? We're called to carry a different level of integrity. But at the same time, Jesus does seem to operate with a level of shrewdness. People are asking questions about, do you pay taxes to Caesar? Can we catch you in that? And he answers in a clever way that people go, hang on a minute, I need to go away and think, is that? And by the time they're beginning to head, he's gone and he's moved on. He's played them. There are so many times you see Jesus operating in that realm, and he says to his followers at one point, I want you to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Now that's deliberate. He doesn't say, I want you to be wily as a fox or wise as a serpent. Now we know a reference to the serpent. That's in Genesis, and the serpent was the craftiest of all creatures. I want you to be wise like that, but innocent as doves, because my followers can be prone to being wise as doves and innocent as doves. So innocent, so clean, that actually they don't operate in a way that they could do, or even that I'm modeling. So, if we're being called to be shrewd and follow his example, but not be dishonest to a level of deviousness, how can we pull at that thread? Go, what might that mean for us? Let's have a look at some of these. Here's what I like to call level 1 shrewdness. Okay? There's an old Japanese game show that Katie and I used to watch called Takeshi's Castle. And some of you have seen it. It has a poor value of human life, particularly for these Japanese contestants who throw themselves at all sorts of tasks. The newer version, they all have helmets and safety jackets and everything. And much as I appreciate their value for human life, it's not as entertaining. One of the tasks that these contestants subject themselves to is a series of walls that have 3 doors. And they throw themselves at these doors. One of those doors is just a paper outline, and you just burst through it and run on to the next one. The other 2 are solid. And of course, needless to say, you watch contestants running through a paper door or running into a solid wall. And you may or may not find that entertaining. What does that say about me? Well, we'll see. There's something about this that I think God speaks into. Because it's not just about the hard work. It's not just you apply yourselves and you run at these things. There's a discernment that God is calling his people to have. There is a prophetic discernment that he's calling his people to have. When I sometimes would say to young people with their exams coming up, should we be praying for you? Occasionally I get this response, isn't that cheating? Isn't that cheating that I'm asking God to kind of give me the answers in the exam room? And you say, well, what kind of God do you think you have? Do you think he's going to operate in that? But if it's going to give you an edge, wouldn't you lay hold of that? Yeah, good point. Okay, yes, will you be praying for me in my exam? Yes, why not? You know, when we're capable, it's so easy for us to go, it's all right, God, I've got this. I can plow on with this from now on. But God is saying, I don't want you to be throwing yourself hard at solid walls when I'm going to tell you which way that you want to go. This prayer week that's coming up is part of this process. Us coming before God as a church going, we work hard, we're capable people, but we don't want to rely on those things. You know, when members of the church, when you've got meetings coming up, the finance team, you know, highly capable finance people, don't presume we've got this because we've got the skills. Begin your meeting with prayer and even a pause to listen and say, God, what are the things that you might say to us? Let's not apply our energies plowing into walls. Sometimes God will call us to plow and fight and throw ourselves at solid walls to break through. But let's not be doing that if we don't need to be. But that's just level one. This parable isn't really simply about that. What might level two be like? Well, one of the common interpretations of this parable is that the manager wasn't actually playing with his boss's money. What he was reducing on the bill was his own interest that he charges in commission. And so what it looked like was that he was doing the guys a favor with his boss's money, but actually it was his money, and so it was all completely above board. The boss comes along, sees him, and says, "Ha, see what you did there, well played." He's not offended because it's not his money, but he sees the guy and he commends him for that level of shrewdness. He's thinking outside the box, if you like. Matt and I were talking about this week and thinking in some ways that's what's going on with Lighthouse when we run the Lighthouse event for parents and children. The parents come and say, so we get a week of free childcare and you just do this? Fine. How are our children? And we say, we get your children for a week and you give them to us and we just spend the whole week telling them about Jesus. Who's the sucker now? We don't say that. And actually, if we're honest, that's not really the sentiment because we're being open and honest about it. We put it on the posters. It's clearly, obviously, it's a Christian event. It's not secret and hidden. But it is, if you like, a level of shrewdness just going, this is the place we live in. This is the dynamic that's available. Let's see how we can play that. Okay? That's one way we can look at the shrewdness of this manager. But what about level 3? Well, one of the other interpretations is that what the manager is doing is he's reducing not his own commission, he's reducing the commission that the master is charging. And the master is charging too much commission because according to Mosaic law, he shouldn't be charging interest. And so what he's doing is he's cutting that Mosaic law interest off. The master can't complain because he shouldn't have been charging it in the first place. He can't really expose that because then he exposes himself, and then the master very simply says to him, yeah, okay, well played. Well played. You played me, you played everybody else. Well played. He's gaming the system, if you like. The missionary, Brother Andrew, who would go into communist countries and bring Bibles and do all sorts of mission work. At one point, he was trying to get into a communist country, and when he filled in the paperwork and put down missionary every time they'd refuse his application. And he went away and prayed about it and said, okay, God, what do I do? And he was reminded that those who share the gospel are known as teachers. Those who explain the gospel are called teachers. So when he got the form again, he just wrote down, teacher. Got in straight away. Okay, is that dishonest? No. Is it shrewd? Yes. Is it gaming the system? Absolutely. Do you know, I heard of a ministry in America where it was a woman who got saved out of a life of working in a strip club as a stripper and a lap dancer. And she decided to set up a ministry and a mission back to people that she worked alongside and other strip clubs in the area that he went as well. And so what she would do is she'd take teams of women, obviously not men, teams of women into these places. They pray beforehand and they go in, and then they would pay for a private dance. And they go into a private room, and then they'd say to the woman, listen, I don't want you to dance for me, but seeing as I've paid for your time, I just want to say this to you. When you're tired of this, and when you want a different world, I want to tell you there is a God who values you and measures your worth in a different way. And if you want to lay hold of that, here's our card. Give us a call. That's gaming the system, isn't it? That's clever. That's using what's there in a place to reach in a way that couldn't other be reached. What about level 4? What might that be understanding in terms of this manager? Well, that's the way we understand it in its simplest term. He really is using his boss's money to grant him favor. He's doing it in such a way that his boss, who is also, a schemer and a devious, looks at it and goes, okay, you cost me money there, but I can't help admit that was really crafty. Yeah, I would have done the same. In fact, guys, you see this guy? This is the kind of person I want working for me. He's prepared to sell himself out. He's prepared to sell me out just to sort is secure. That's why he's commending him. He's making loss. The guy is playing every single angle. I came across when I was doing some mission work in Serbia, I came across a guy who was doing an interesting thing. Serbia was historically a communist country. It was part of Yugoslavia. And those churches operated under that realm of communist rule. And so there was paperwork the churches had to register. And even afterwards, after the Balkans War, Serbia still has elements of that sort of communist infrastructure, that bureaucratic system. When we go out there, we'd have to present ourselves to the police station. And they would give us a white card and they'd stamp it and we'd have to carry that wherever we went. And you go, this really does feel like a sort of, a film where we're presenting ourselves to the KGB, sort of Cold War film. So it still has that infrastructure. Well, what he was doing was he'd go around and he'd find a church that has since kind of petered out and died out. And he'd find the nephew or the niece or the grandson where that church was who still had the paperwork in their loft. And he'd take that and then they would begin a church there. And then the authorities would come along and they'd say, you can't run a church here. You can't start a church here. You're not allowed to do that. And he said, no, we're not starting a church. There's always been a church here. Here's the paperwork. And they would look at that and then they would say, oh my goodness, well, why are you meeting in this little school hall? Why are you meeting in this barn? The town hall is available to you. You are part of the system. We've just got a new PA. Why are you using this? Use our big new PA because you are part of us. You are part of the system. Come into the town hall and run your church. Now, if he was planting a church just by sheer hard work in that place, he would have to graft, and where there's no paperwork, they would have to graft and throw themselves at doors to break through in prayer and in fasting and all of those things. But you see how gaming the system, playing it from every angle, suddenly all the doors are opened. I think probably the ultimate example of this is Paul. Paul is arrested. He's put on trial. And they don't quite know what to do with him. They can't quite make the charges stick, but at the same time, it's politically controversial to release him. And the first guy comes along and looks at this, his name's Felix, and he says, I can't make a decision, I'm just not going to make a decision. And then Festus comes along, and he says, I can't make a decision. And then a new guy comes along, Agrippa, and they look at the case, and at one point they're saying, you know what, this guy hasn't done anything wrong, we could just let him go. And Paul would be released to go and share the gospel wherever he wants. If he wants to go to Rome, though, he's going to have to find the funds to pay for a boat and the cost to get there. And if he wants to work in the higher echelons of Rome, he can't just rock up at Caesar's palace and go, excuse me, can I tell you about Jesus? So what Paul does instead, he's a Roman citizen, he says, I want my case held at the highest court. I appeal to the high court. What's the high court for a Roman? It's Caesar. And they say to him, you know what, mate, if you do this and Caesar's having a bad day, he's not a fair judge. Bad prawn in the morning, that could be an execution for you in the afternoon. Okay? That's the reality of what you're appealing to. We could let you go. But no, I appeal to Caesar. And so they pay for him to travel all the way. They give him an armed escort all the way against his enemies. He travels all the way to Rome, and then he's in house arrest. Praetorian guards have to keep him under arrest. You imagine those guys are just locked into permanent evangelism. They can't escape. They're on guard duty all the time. You know, one of them rocks up. Marcus says, "What are you doing today, Marcus?" "Oh, I'm guarding that guy Paul again." "Are you?" "Oh, I was doing him yesterday. He just wouldn't shut up about Jesus. He just kept going on." "I know, but you know what? I kind of think he's got a point." "Ah, you're kidding me." You know, the guy rocks up and says, "Marcus, great to see you again. How you doing? How's the wife? I was praying for her last night." So where were we? So Jesus is walking on and this guy's just standing there going, "I can't go anywhere." Paul writes, he says, the whole Praetorian Guard now knows about Jesus, and many in Caesar's household have come to know him personally. And then Paul gets to speak with Caesar, and as far as we know, it cost him his life. It cost him everything. But he appealed to Caesar. He played the game. That's a level of shrewdness and craftiness that Jesus is calling on for his disciples. True riches. He said, if you are faithful in these, if you can't be faithful in worldly money, how can you be trusted with true riches? What does he mean when he says true riches? I wonder if it might mean this. You know that line that we sing in a song, we might sing it later. He is the Lord and he reigns on high. We ask not for riches, but look to the cross, and for our inheritance, give us the lost. That's true riches. God, we want to be faithful in these things that we can have true heavenly riches. And I've got one final thing to say. I wouldn't pick me to go on a desert island. But Jesus doesn't pick us according to our skill set, according to whether we already have this. Jesus picks us because he loves us, and then he molds us into who he calls us to be. It's not that we have to qualify first with any of these skills before we can. And one person put it this way: Jesus doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. He's already factored in your stupidity and your inadequacy when he called you. He knows what he's getting. So don't for a moment disqualify yourself going, "I don't have the skill set." Begin instead to say, "God, now that you have called me, grow in me who you need me to become. Where are the areas where I can be working more? I'm not going to do this by my own strength and my own efforts. I want to have your leading. But at the same time, Lord, I want to offer everything to you, even my life, so that in every angle and in every way, and with every level of shrewdness that you require of me, I may see your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Should we pray together? Lord, when we read the rich man commends the dishonest manager, there's still a level of us that goes, "Yeah, but." But with what that we can take hold of with this, the things that we can understand that you want to bring before us, help us to take hold of that and run with it and draw lines with it, not bend it this way and that and not understand it, but do with it what you are calling us to do. Make us wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Make us crafty and shrewd if you need to, but most of all, Lord, call us to offer before you, inspire us to offer before you, by your Spirit, stir us to offer before you everything that we have and everything we are for your glory. Break our heart with what breaks yours, everything we are for your kingdom's cause. Amen.